Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Morris Shapiro here, Senior Director with Park West Gallery, and I'm honored to have the opportunity today to speak to two remarkable, world-class contemporary artists who also happen to be brothers. I have the Kostabi brothers. We have Mark Kostabi and Paul Kostabi with me today. Gentlemen, how you doing?
Great. How are
Wonderful
you?
to have you with me. I think it's so nice to be able to have both of you here at the same time. And we can talk about your past and about your experiences as brothers and as professionals and as artists. So, you know, I'm so in awe of the talent that both of you have. And I think it's truly extraordinary. You're both, very famous museum quality visual artists. You're both musicians at a professional level. I know, Paul, you do producing and all sorts of other work, engineering as well. What's the deal with the water in your home, in your home, from Estonia? Is there something special in the water? I mean, like, what's
right, the Estonian water or the Whittier water?
No, seriously, your parents were from Estonia,
Yeah.
and you were both born in California,
Right.
so you're Americans. What year did your parents come over?
1947,
47. Okay.
as far as I know.
That's
Yeah.
a fact. I didn't know.
I
I
think
just
it's-
know it was right after the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was-
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And I
But
think.
they didn't come together. They met in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Our mother went to Canada 1st.
Uh-huh.
Our father went straight to Orange County, California, when all it was orange trees. And that's where the jobs were for immigrants, to pick oranges.
Wow.
And he told us that was his first job.
Right. He
Really?
came across with the immigration visa. That's how he got his ticket across.
Wow.
And then they met at the Los Angeles Estonian House, which is a civic club where Estonians hang out.
And what was your childhood like? Did you go to public school? Did you go to private school?
We went to public school, like local. We could actually walk there. So we were like, we would walk to school every day, and we went to the same school in the elementary school. So we got to see sort of like a typical American youth. However, we were a little different. That we weren't the most well-off people. We didn't have a car, so we had to walk to school. We didn't get dropped off, things like that. And so the other children would sort of like zero in on us, or at least me.
Me
and
too.
like bully,
Yeah.
a
Really?
little bit of bullying.
Yeah.
So, things like that. So we were a little bit off, but right within, the American dream, which
Yeah.
is what
Yeah.
our parents were.
Well,
Yeah, our parents had financial trouble, but ironically, we had the nicest house in the neighborhood.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine that, because you were a little bit ostracized, you guys stuck together a lot. You were very close.
Yeah.
You started your childhood.
In the youth. Yeah. Well, we had another brother as well, though. So
Ah.
we had three.
We were three.
We were three
brothers
going
and
to
one-
the same school at the
okay.
same time.
Macy School. And one half sister.
One
who
half
was older.
sister.
Right.
Okay. Now, were your parents interested in art as well?
Yeah, yes, they were. But then we also had possibly, I like to think of it as an advantage to the other kids, because I think it was our mother who sold encyclopedias, the World Book Encyclopedia. So we had access to that. Like today, Google. Back then, it was like, wow, we got this book. It's one, but it's a stack this high.
I remember
So
them well.
I mean, I would scour it. I would see
too.
Mark scouring it.
Yeah.
We knew about moon landings. We knew about East Coast. We knew
Right.
about philosophies at such an early age, because we had this voluminous.
It was fabulous to read those. I did it all the time. My
And
favorite
they're
was
still there. You
I know.
lose X, Y, Z, lose F, and then we're like,
fantastic.
What was
fantastic.
in F? What was, we
Whenever
want
you were
F.
bored, just pick up a copy
Well,
of World Book,
Exactly. He brought up something very interesting that I didn't realize until now. I scoured those books and saw drawings of board meetings, and I kind of did them in my own style as I was developing the style I'm known for. And I would add irony, and I was like, I scoured them at an earlier age too, but I scoured them a lot when I was already in art school.
Right.
And people would say about my drawings, how can you have so much insight for such a young person? You must have an old soul, because I was making commentary about the corporate world. But I didn't really know what I was doing. I just liked the way the board meetings looked in the encyclopedia. And I didn't realize how influential those books were until now.
Interesting. Fascinating to go back
they're-
and discover those early elements.
And our parents were both very cultural. Both were musicians.
Right.
Our father made thousands of drawings. He didn't show them in galleries, but he would draw
Right.
all the time. Paul has incorporated some of those drawings in his paintings.
Oh, nice. That's interesting. Yeah.
And our
yeah.
mother was a professional piano teacher, and we grew up listening to her play classical music 3 hours every morning.
Marvelous.
Right.
And
So we had all that, but we're still battling the regular youth of the time that were growing up. So, so we learned a lot about the East Coast and the Eastern way through these books, and that's sort of what prompted me, like probably in the '70s when I started to first play music. That would have been the '60s, encyclopedia era. So in the '70s, I started to play music and learned about punk rock and roll. And you read magazines and fanzines. And then at this point, I'm in junior high school, getting ready to go into high school. And for some reason, he was an artist in a different high school. He was known as the artist there, and I wasn't quite the artist yet in my high school. But for some reason, I was on the journalism, the school paper.
School paper.
And they assigned me the cartoonist.
Okay.
Which I wasn't really, I'm not there yet. So I would get him to cheat. He would sometimes do my comic
do your
strip.
cartoons for you, huh?
Yeah, but I would influence it because I was reading fanzines, punk rock fanzines where it's already cartoon and high contrast, super graphics. Yeah. So I would be tracing these images and he would add to it. And he titled my comic strip Polyphonic Assemblages, which is like he had interesting.
I had a comic strip at my high school too called Megalomaniacal Regurgitations.
Right. So we were inventing these words based on what we had. What kid age
comes up with
13
stuff
is
like
going to
that.
come up with that?
I know, crazy.
Yeah. So we were fortunate to have that, and we used, I guess we used it, and we're still using it.
That's marvelous. That's fantastic.
And then back in our family history, we had a lot of musicians. Our uncle Heino was a very famous Estonian music theorist and published books on classical music theory, and he influenced a lot of the current Estonian classical musicians. Estonia is known for music, especially classical.
Like Arvo Pärt.
Like Arvo Pärt, who is one of the most famous musicians alive today, composer, who happens to be Estonian. And then the Järvi family. So there was a lot of encouragement. Our parents didn't say, no, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer. If you want to paint, do that. If you want to play guitar or piano, they would encourage it, and they would always come to our events, art show openings,
nice.
and faraway events too. Like my mother would come to my shows in Japan, and in Rome, and she loved traveling.
Yeah.
Do you have any family still in Estonia?
Lahti,
just Lahti, right?
Lahti, our aunt.
Lahti Kostabi.
She's a flamenco dancer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Such an amazing artistic family. Incredible. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. So you guys diverge after high school and you kind of go off in your different directions.
Yeah.
You go into art school, and what do you do at that time? You go into music?
This would have been post-high
70s?
school.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much entrenched in music and touring and playing and just exploring that world. Still doing art and stuff. I had my first shows in California. I was involved in a poet society, like working with poets and stuff. So I had these, like sort of a group of people that would do poetry, and they go, hey, could you illustrate my poem? So I would do little things like that for books and fanzines and magazines. And he had a desire to go off to the East Coast, which in my head, I always wanted to go there because I would read, the books, and I go, wait, you want to be in the East Coast, you want to be in New England, you want to have a big brown room with tons of library books. And that was like my fantasy at an early age. And so here I am, I'm sort of like, little house, little library, but we're there. He's got the big house and the big library.
Yeah, and I have some brown in the house too.
Yeah. I've seen some of your early paintings. I saw a painting you did of your father. I think it was your father you painted,
yes.
right?
Which is a lot of brown in that painting.
It's a fantastic painting. It's like really representational, great painting, real chops. So you worked hard in art school. You weren't going to find yourself. You were going to learn your technique, learn your craft.
I wanted to improve my technique and see what the options were. And I was drawing constantly since age 6. At first, I wanted to draw comic books for Marvel or DC. Then I discovered the pre-Raphaelites. and then by the time I got to art school at Cal State Fullerton, I learned about conceptual art. And by then I already knew about Andy Warhol and found him fascinating. And he was one of the first icons that I met when I moved to New York in 1982. He moved there in '84, 2 years later.
Right.
But we both arrived there at the same age because I'm 2 years older than Paul.
Right.
Yeah, and
right.
interestingly, we probably didn't know about pop art at that time because of this, and this whatever was in that encyclopedia probably did not have the term pop art yet. I could be wrong because they were early '60s, even though it existed.
Yep.
So it's like sort of like Google catching up.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of avant-garde stuff in World Book.
It wasn't. I think you're right. It wasn't there. But I learned about pop art when I'd go to the Le Havre Public Library and in the art book sections, and I found minimalism and conceptual art fantasy. But the most intriguing thing was this guy named Andy Warhol that looked like an albino and like a totally crazy freak, and his paintings were interesting. So that's where I learned about pop art, not the encyclopedia.
Yeah,
but I would go to the library, and then he would go to the Whittier Public Library, right? Didn't you do?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You could go there and play records at that time.
Sure.
You check out a record, you put on a jazz record, you put on Thelonious Monk or whatever. I mean, we're fortunate to have a turntable, but I don't think we had a television until a little bit later. So we were sort of reduced as far as that immediate impact of the media.
Popular culture
that's
impact.
probably why, we are making these things that are just so impactful for people.
And Whittier is also known to be, at the time, very conservative and Republican. It was Richard Nixon's hometown. It was also the hometown of MFK Fisher, the famous food writer. And through Paul, I recently learned also it's Tom Waits' hometown.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some famous people came out of Whittier. Now Orange County has become more liberal.
Right.
But at the time, it was a quiet, conservative town. We didn't have to worry about any crime or anything. We'd ride our bikes around and
right, and then even today, it's really actually not Orange County; it's Los Angeles County. So we're on this cusp of like we're on they called it the Orange Curtain.
Yeah, the Orange Curtain.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so neither one of you got swept up into the conceptual movement, though. When you were in New York and you were kind of at the height of a conceptual period. I went to art school as well, and when I graduated in '75. Almost all of my teachers were conceptual artists, and they would kind of ridicule you if you wanted to learn skill and craft. Oh, that's been done before. We're all about defining what art is and what art isn't. Is this art? Is this not art? The artistic narcissism, I like to call it. But you guys didn't get swept into that. You stayed with your core aesthetics.
Yeah, I would say we did stick with the core aesthetics, and then there was also like if you think about, I'm just talking out loud here, it's like when Mark was in high school, he was, an artist and a sort of an art star in a way. And he created this little piece of a hose called a Zolo. He would cut a garden hose into an inch, and he'd be selling these things to the kids, like saying, this is art. That's the conceptual art part of it.
That was actually retained. That was actually in elementary school.
Elementary school.
See,
you were making conceptual art in elementary school.
Yeah, he was bringing bags of Zolos to school and selling Zolos.
How did you come up with this idea? Did you discover Duchamp or something, or what?
It just seemed like 1 inch of garden hose, you write Zolo on it, and you offer it to the kids for 5 cents.
And it was incredible.
And they bought
Nice.
He had a bag of
like
Zolos,
a collector's item.
back with a pocket full of nickels.
So that's where your initial orientation toward commerce occurred.
Yes, commerce and
right at that
conceptual.
time.
I think so.
I love it. That's
pop art
fantastic.
too. If you do some Zolo paintings today.
Very pop art. That's fantastic. Okay, so we get to New York. Fast forward, you get to New York. Tell us about what happens at that point. You start getting into the art scene.
Okay.
And what are you doing at that point?
Okay, I'm there. 1984. I'm enmeshed in the music scene there, playing music, playing CBGBs, all the clubs, whatever was going on then. Trying to sort of carve that path, but it's a challenge because it's a band. It's not like an individual. It's like you have a group of people, so it's just you're in a band,
dynamics.
but it's also you're battling your band.
Yeah.
So it's like all this. And meanwhile, I'm also job holding with Mark, being an assistant with other artists like Richard Hamilton, Rosemary Castaro, and a few other painters where I would work and learn behind the scenes about art, but still making paintings and being in group shows and things like that. And Mark was like the king of the group shows. He had over like 120 group shows in 1 year. So he was like on the cover of all the magazines and stuff. So, but it was, it was a scene. It was like when I asked some of the Park West clients if they've heard of like the East Village, they don't know about the East Village, but if you add the East Village scene, it's sort of like something clicks. So it's been written about a lot, but like today, it's something that already happened 40 years ago. It's like, and then before that, I could be wrong, but didn't it also happen in the 50s with the
Beats?
The Beats and the abstract
yeah.
expressionists?
Yeah, exactly.
The 10th Street scene, and that was basically just the whole 10th Street from east to west was filled with artists and people trying to, or doing. They weren't trying to do anything, they were doing it. They were, it's incredible.
And you're working your way into the artistic milieu, the scene, so to speak, the legitimate galleries, getting a lot of exposure, a lot of press. And let's talk for a little bit about the controversial part of your early years, your intent to kind of be controversial, to be, someone who is pushing against the grain of what people expect. So just give me your thought. Now, after all these years and where you are now, so successful, you don't really need to rely upon being controversial anymore. You're focused on your art, which is spectacular. What are your reflections about that period in your life?
Well, I have more than one controversy connected to my career. The first one was even before I was known for hiring painting assistants and turning that into a performance art piece. But the first one was because I was so openly candid about the business side of the art world. And I think that started when I was an art student at Cal State Fullerton. All the students at this advanced painting class were asked, why did you decide to become an artist? And all the other students gave very poetic, spiritual answers. And I just said, to make money. And the whole class laughed. And it was like a big comedy moment. And the teacher said, oh, you're going to be a pop personality, because I entertained them. And that answer, I didn't program it to get attention, but it got attention. And I could see that attention is valuable. If in the art world, visibility is everything, and getting attention is an asset. And so that when I started doing interviews in New York, I was actually a little shy and didn't know how to answer all these questions I was getting, but I noticed that people were asking all the same questions. And then one time I said, okay, this time I've got to prepare. And so this art critic that we both know, Carlo McCormick, was about to interview me for the East Village Eye. And I prepared. I wrote a list of the 10 most commonly asked questions I get, and I carefully wrote out interesting answers. And when he interviewed me, he thought I was reading the answers, and he didn't mind because it was good material. And that interview was extremely popular and got quoted in numerous publications like the New York Times and Art in America, and I think the Village Voice, and that kind of launched my persona as the business artist. But I was doing all the work 100% by myself at the time. Then the second controversy came when I started openly speaking about using an art studio. And I saw that was getting attention, not all of it positive, but I liked the attention, and I decided to amplify it and turn it into a performance piece where I gave my studio a name, Kostabi World, and I'd go on a lot of TV shows, and I've never slapped anybody though.
Yeah, we're referencing something that happened very recently for future. Who people tune into the future, it's a contemporary moment. Well, that interview that you did, and you wrote those answers down. Those answers were controversial. They were combative. And that was what shocked that writer initially.
Well, the writer, he wasn't shocked because he loved it. He said, "This is going to be a great interview," and it was a cover story as a result of these prepared answers.
Oh, nice. And that was the beginning.
And I met an enemy of one famous artist because one thing I did when I first got to New York, I called up my favorite artists and I said, "I like your work and I'd like to meet you." And numerous of them said, "Yes, sure, come on over." Like George Siegel, and I don't know if I should mention the name of the guy that didn't like me. He liked me at first, and I went to his studio and we had a great time. And then when Carlo asked me, why did you say that to these artists? Well, I like your work and I'd like to meet you, and then go to their studio. And I wrote, as a joke, I wanted them to see who will dethrone them.
Okay.
And one famous artist in particular was really upset about that. And to this day, when he's interviewed about me, when he hears that he's being interviewed for a film that's about me or something, he'll just walk out of the room. But anyway, it was a good line, and other people thought that was brilliant. Like, I want to see the whites of their eyes. And, anyway, controversy sells. I mean, I believe in the philosophy you say less and say yes. Unless you're talking to the press, then say more, but don't bore.
Okay. Good philosophy right there. So, Paul, you're playing music. How do you evolve into your visual art career? How does it come?
Okay, well, in some sense, I'm dabbling in both, or I'm doing both. So it was sort of just natural. And, there's a lot of galleries even today, they do shows of musicians that make art.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little bit of that. And, just like Mark, you're there, you meet people, you do shows, you just keep pushing. And, 30, 40 years later, you forget a lot of it. And like even today, it's like I guess this is pre-war art at this point, or post-war art.
Yeah.
The new war.
Continuing war.
And then the pandemic and everything. So it's like a lot of that history that's there that is fascinating and interesting. It's like you were saying earlier, it's really only worth about 15 seconds at this point, because, you can get the synopsis in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I have musician friends that are half my age, and they know way more about music than I'll ever know because of Cliff Notes, or Wikipedia.
Yeah,
we had Cliff Notes in high school and things like that. So you could cheat, you could read the book, but you could really just get it in 2 seconds. So you're painting. Like I said, Mark was he moved from the East Village to Soho was sort of the goal then. I don't know what the goal is today, because like all of New York, there's just galleries everywhere, and they're coming and going. They're called pop-ups at this point. Back then, it seemed like there was a little bit of more of a solid scene, like when Mark was showing with Ronald Feldman Gallery. A gallery still in business today, whereas I think all the other galleries that you showed at are probably not in business today.
A lot of them are gone, yeah.
So it's like, what happened? Is it commerce? Is it art? Is it history? Is it, So here we are today. You got to keep pushing.
It's fascinating to me, if we try to look at what is the art of today, what is the actual contemporary art of this moment, try and come up with something that we can specifically sink our teeth into. I don't think there is anything in terms of a transformative, collective consciousness artistically. It's happening in the world, like the abstract expressionist movement, like the pop movement. Conceptualism still, you got artists, like Jeff Koons, for example, who's, selling things for tremendous amounts of money. And you got Damien Hirst, and again, controversy, right? Controversy selling. But in terms of a growing narrative artistically, I think it's hard to find. So I think you guys are really important as kind of signposts of where art was and where art is now, because you're continuing your narratives from when you began your careers, and you're making some of your best work now. And now you're reaching a broad audience through Park West, which is changing, I think, as well, the paradigm a little bit.
It's wonderful.
You're reaching a large audience of people in many cases that have never been oriented toward art, and certainly would not have seen your work, I think, because you were in more the elitist galleries and museums. Let's talk about the distinction, one of my favorite topics, the distinction between form and content. And when you're creating your works, how much of your orientation is form-oriented? How much of it is content-oriented? Is it equilibrium? Are you just in the creative process, creative experience, and you let the viewer worry about content when you complete the work? Or how much is that in your creative process?
I'm C, the last one. Mostly that. It kind of melds. It all melds. I start with form, and then the content seeps in, and then it goes back to form, and then the release. I believe in Mark's world, it's form. Or no, content. Content.
Yeah.
So, and then that's today. But yes, it's just a painting, right? It's just a painting. Tomorrow it might be something else, like a digital thing, like an NFT, which I really don't know a lot about. But that might be the future of all the art. You bring up Koons.
Yeah.
He's now doing his first NFT, and he's using a classic phrase, to the moon, like Elon Musk. He's actually sending the artwork that'll become the NFT to the moon, which is a play on Dogecoin, Dogecoin, whatever you call it, Shiba Inu, and all that. So he's way ahead of the curve as far as that, even though he's, 15 years late? But he'll probably come out as the king, whereas someone like Damien Hirst does a piece called Currency, which just means currency, money.
Yeah.
Right? That's all it is, currency.
Right.
But that's the name he titled his whole piece that, which I think is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be the future too. You know, he burns art, he destroys art, he makes art, and it's an NFT, a non-fungible token.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
whoop-de-doo.
I know. You talk about conceptualism, really, you know. So back to the same
Form or
question.
content.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Paul's right. Usually I'm content driven, but
Mm-hmm.
I can sometimes I do paintings that are just a celebration of the sensuous human form without a commentary on society. This one obviously has content about society.
Yes, indeed. Uh-huh.
And it also has form. And the other one over there is more vague. There's no specific social message being made. It's just this layering of images of love and introspection. But sometimes usually I title my paintings after I paint them, but sometimes I'll do the title first. Like if there's a phrase that's being used a lot in the world that used to not be used, most recently I noticed, and we've all noticed, that accept all cookies is something that we see every day 20 times. And I said, well, that would make a great painting. So I made a painting of a figure with juggling 20 different kinds of cookies. And I just finished it, and I put it on social media, and it was a big hit. And one person on Facebook said, oh, you left out the fortune.
Oh,
Because I had
fortune.
Oreos and all the other kinds of cookies. But I collaborate with the public on social media. So now I wrote him back. I said, don't worry, the next version is going to include the fortune cookie. Thanks for the great idea.
Yeah.
I owe you a pizza.
That was a great idea. Good suggestion. Yeah.
Something that couldn't have happened 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Without social media. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I take surveys on Facebook and Instagram all the time.
Yeah.
You get an instant opinion, a mass opinion.
Yeah.
It's like a marketing survey. You know if something's a hit or if it's not so much a hit, right in half an hour.
And I've noticed within the art world, the internet was very slow to adopt. I mean, the art world fought the fax machine.
Sure.
So they were like, that's the devil, the fax machine. You get your first fax machine, you're all of a sudden getting weird things popping up. So you get art, information. That was a really good instantaneous source of information. So now it's that. You accept all the cookies and,
A lot of it, I think, was people wanted to, they were leery about digital imagery, be able to sell art through digital imagery. They wanted to make sure people had the phenomenological experience, the sensory experience of looking at art, which we certainly can relate to. So when you're in your process of working, you're constantly, evolving in the painting. You're in the moment. You're very much like an abstract expressionist from that standpoint. So the painting is almost a repository for the experience that you go through. Yeah,
it's an action,
which is wonderful. I love that aspect about your work, and it has this really powerful impact. And talk for a minute about the ART aspect of your image. I think it's good to get that documented.
ART, that's art.
It comes up a lot, right?
Yeah, ART, it spells art. Yeah. Attack, release, threshold.
Threshold,
but not in that order.
Not in that order.
Necessarily.
Right.
So you set your threshold. In this case here, this is a culture hustle piece. I'm hustling the culture. And it's 9 colors, right? So my threshold's 9 colors of a certain product. So I have to put that in this parameter or perimeter, whichever you want to use. And I attack the canvas with all these colors. And once I reach that threshold, the painting's
released.
It's released. I'm releasing it, but it's also ready to release. However, I wouldn't mind touching this one up a little if someone buys it all. It's never really finished.
Of course, yeah.
So that's ART in a sentence.
Nice. And when do you know a painting is finished? Common question for artists.
I've had some stock answers for that. So I used to say when the check clears. Without being glib, it's ambiguous because I frequently rework paintings years after I thought it was finished.
Yes, I know. I see that.
I just sent 5 big paintings back to my New York studio from Rome before getting on the plane to come here, with the express intention of reworking them and improving them. Because when you look at a past work, if you've been staring at it for 10 years in your house and you see, oh, that could have been better, or maybe now I can collaborate with my former self and make a new, an improved version on the original canvas. Also, frequently, Paul and I collaborate on paintings, and often it's me giving him a painting that was interesting but lacked something. So sometimes I'll like mask off all the areas of my painting that I like that I don't want messed with, and then he attacks the rest of it, and it ends up being 10 times better than it used to be.
Yeah.
He's really a master of composition and also of atmospheric perspective. You can see it in this painting. If you notice the upper left-hand corner, all those colors are sort of muted, kind of mixed into each other, so it becomes kind of grayed, and it really goes back
Pushing back in space, yeah.
Like a lot of the times Paul's paintings deal with flatness, but this one has clearly a foreground and a background. And I love the fact that there's two very different kinds of flowers. One looks like it's coming out of a skyscraper shaped vase with one strange sunflower, and then there's this explosion of flowers on the right. It's just great. It reminds me of the best paintings of Jasper Johns.
Yeah, and what I do a lot of times in the process is I use Google Lens, which is something we also didn't have. So I'll zoom in on an area and check to see what matches out in the world for actually inspiration. So I'll have one little area of a painting and like 1,000 images will pop up. So
I see what you're saying.
and that'll inspire me to maybe go in a different direction.
Oh, interesting.
So like when if you Google Lens one of Mark's paintings, it's almost 99% Mark Kostabi art. But if you go and take a little section, it might be something else.
Interesting.
So you might get Johns, Rauschenberg, Jackson Pollock, Picasso, Moreau. You might get it all in here. And that's sort of intentional because of that new technology.
Wow, beautiful.
So, yeah,
that's wonderful insight. Yeah.
Yeah, that I have never tried that, but I'm going to try that now. What I've noticed is, and with music, because I compose piano pieces, I'll put them on YouTube, and then I'll watch them on YouTube. And when the composition finishes, their algorithm immediately puts on similar music,
Exactly.
and I'm usually very flattered because my piece is followed up by Debussy or my favorite composers. But it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about referencing in your work. As musicians, we talk a lot about referencing. Other artists, we're playing a particular type of music, or we're involved in a particular passage. We're thinking of a musician who inspires us. Do you have that experience in painting? And who are some of the artists that you like to reference, or who are some of the artists that have been hugely inspirational for you in your careers?
For me, it was the last 3 or 4, what I said on this one. What was it?
Jasper Johns, Picasso.
Picasso, Moreau. All the greats. And it's like, if you want to ask a future question, like who are the current greats, I can't really tell you. So there's just so much art out there.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to focus. So I like to think of like, if I'm still making something that's referencing all that, I still want it to look original.
Of course.
Or if it's totally unoriginal and someone likes it, it's like that's okay. But I like to have the impact of something that someone's really looking at that they haven't seen anything like it before. And like these are plants. Some people call them florals or flowers, but they're really living. They're in the thing. They're not. They're in a.
They're not cut. They got dirt.
You're living in the dirt.
They're in a vase. They're alive, like all this. And so they're more than still lifes. They're kind of like, they're not dead, but they're still dead lives. So,
yeah.
But I want it to feel like it's a living thing. So. Yeah. And I'm sure Mark does too, and really any artist. You want it to. You don't want to just walk by it. No, it's just a poster in a hotel lobby or something. You want to whoa.
Yep.
So it's like we want the impact. It's
absolutely. Well, you both do very well at that, certainly. What about you, Mark? Are you referencing anyone these days?
Historical influences. Well, I'm inspired by the lighting of Caravaggio, the extreme side lighting that he basically started, which inspired Hollywood movies too.
Sure.
Like film noir. And then De Chirico, who also painted faceless figures. I was already painting faceless figures before I knew much about De Chirico. But then when I moved to New York, the first big museum show I saw was in, I think, 1982. It was a De Chirico retrospective at MoMA.
Yeah.
So then it clicked to me, and then I understood why some people said my figures have a connection to De Chirico and also Leger. And then, of course, I'm influenced by Andy Warhol, not so much by his art, but by his philosophy of life.
Right.
He was a very playful character, always in a good mood, and encouraged other artists. And then his business practice, of course, was very smart. And occasionally I've done paintings with Warhol references, like the flowers in the background and
Right.
two of my
Soup
figures
cans.
and the soup cans. Yeah, I've specifically referenced a lot of art history, in addition to being internally influenced by some of it.
Yeah.
I love Dali
Mm-hmm.
very much, and Albrecht Dürer immensely. I've been influenced a lot by, especially Albrecht Dürer's Melancholia print.
Yeah.
Did a whole series based
Yeah,
on
I
that.
remember seeing a drawing based on Melancholia. It was terrific. Yeah, you mentioned George Siegel, another interesting artist thing with relation to your work as well. Yeah,
Yes, I was a fan of George Siegel, who I learned about in art school, and he kind of made anonymous figures too. They had faces, but they were kind of blended out, sort of. You couldn't really tell who it was all the time. It became kind of a cipher for a human being. And he was one of the first artists I called up out of the blue.
Right.
And I said, I like your work and I'd like to meet you. And he embraced me, and we spent 4 hours together. I never talked about myself at all until the last half hour. He said, oh, well, so what do you do? And it was at that point I whipped out my slides and showed him. Because I know you got to let the other person shine first.
Of course, yeah.
And he said he loved my work, and the proof is he wrote a catalog essay for me for a book that was published in the 80s called Office Suite. Suite spelled S-U-I-T-E, and there was all my commentary on office life and business. So that was really great. So almost all of the artists I called up out of the blue liked me. The one guy who I mentioned earlier, I just remember the exact quote that pissed him off. I said, I want my victims to see who will dethrone them. And I was sure he would realize that was a joke. But, these days, what?
I'm a little insecure.
Not
probably.
everyone can take a joke.
Yeah. Slight
Yeah, I
insecurity.
mean, as far as
start.
inspiration, I guess it's called like riffing. You're riffing on a system. It's like he's riffing on Caravaggio, Chiaroscuro, all that stuff. And I'm riffing on this stuff, but it's the same in music. It's like he discovered his music's in line with some of the classical greats. You put on any of my music, and you're going to bring up heavy metal all day long.
Sure.
So which is a humongous, genre.
And street art is an interesting topic when discussing Paul Kostabi also, because you said earlier that there's no real art movement like there was back in the abstract expressionism day, which was then replaced by pop art, then by minimalism, then by conceptualism. Now you're right, it's pluralism now. It's like you can do anything you want. However, there's one genre that's extremely popular, and that's street art. And Paul's one of the foremost innovators of street art. He was doing street art in the 80s, and to this day he has numerous murals throughout the East Village. But he's lucky because he's smart enough not to go to jail for it. He gets permission from the owner of the building. So when the police come up, he shows the permission letter to paint on the gates.
Right, which I've had to do.
Yeah. And then he was talking riffing, and also in street art, people do dogging. Also, like occasionally someone will dog your piece. And you have to go fix it, right?
Right, but when street art, like in the 80s, when it was called street art or graffiti or vandalism, whatever you wanted to call it, there weren't a lot of artists out there doing something that looked like something. It was just tags, like a name.
Names,
you had Keith Haring, he would do the little cartoons in the subway and stuff, but that was just a little short-lived thing. And the taggers kept going for years and years and years, and eventually it just became, I think in the last 5 years, they called it street art, because I always thought of street art back then was like artists at Venice Beach that were painting on the sidewalk, and they were selling their art on the street, like in Las Vegas and Venice and like the tourist towns. That was street art to me. So I never accepted that word, street art, but I'll take it today. At least I'm, like there's still some street artists down in Soho, the same guys that were there in the 80s.
On the sidewalk to sell for
they
price.
make little $20 paintings and they draw on the sidewalk. That was street art.
But now the term is used to describe Banksy.
It's a legit
it's a
movement
marketing.
now.
It's more, and if a museum has low attendance, all they have to do is mount a street art show, and thousands of people will come. And same with Impressionism. That'll bring in thousands of people too. But we both knew Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring and another, maybe the first real street artist, Richard Hambleton, because they didn't use the word street art then, but he's kind of like the father of it.
Yeah, he would be the godfather. He just did shadows.
He did the shadow figures.
Shadows of. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah,
shadows of just people in dark alleys.
They were scary, and we were all neighbors. I was actually his tenant. Richard Hambleton was my landlord at 5 Rivington, and Paul lived across the street in 8 Rivington, where Jean-Michel Basquiat would come and visit, and Keith Haring would walk down the street, and it was all a big, cacophony of different artists meeting each other, partying, and clubs, openings. The 80s were a big, colorful, amazing party.
Yeah. From that period, you too are the, elder statesman. A lot of those people are gone. And you're here, you're still working, progressing, growing in your work, broadening, the exposure of your work to the world. So it's a wonderful thing.
As far as turning it over and getting new people, I'm not really noticing it in New York. Like new art scene. I mean, the last big thing was the YBAs, and that's not even really a New York artist.
That was kind of a movement from England,
It was a movement from England. They came in and it was like, oh, this is something. But it's definitely a changed world, and I guess we're fortunate to still be here and be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way.
Considering everything that's happened in the last 2-3 years on top of that.
I feel the same way. Really interesting time. And that's why I think it's really important for us to document these times. This time in particular, I think it's going to be fascinating for people in the future to look back at this particular time and see how it's affected so many aspects of our society. Art being, I think one of the most interesting, one of the most relevant, I think. The way artists, you guys are the people that are attuned, to the changes in society and culture. And it's important for you guys to guide us and help us find some clarity amidst this craziness that we're experiencing right now. Let's, one more question. I know you guys like to collaborate on paintings, which I think is fantastic. I think the fact that 2 brothers who have such disparate styles, right? And you've gone your different paths, but you've stayed close together, obviously. And you come together to make a painting, which is just amazing to me. I think that's just marvelous. How do you determine which painting you're going to create? When do you determine you want to collaborate on something? Is it for specific exhibitions, museum shows? Just take us through that process of the collaboration.
Well, he generally starts it and I finish it. So he starts.
How often do they happen? Like maybe every few months you say, hey, let's collaborate a little bit? Or
yeah, I mean, it's throughout the years.
It's organic,
Over the years, it's organic. It'll be like, I don't want to say that like I'm relegated to like background, because he was saying he tapes off areas. And what's interesting is when he tapes them off, a lot of times I don't know what's under there. I just, his assistants, they put so much tape on this thing, I cannot see
I love
a
it. That's
thing.
Fantastic.
So
that's really great.
I'm sort of shooting in the dark. So that's where I really take out the ART.
Randomness and chance.
I take his start and I make it art.
And you'll just say, this looks like a good painting that Paul should collaborate with. This could be interesting.
Frequently it happens like that.
That's how it is, yeah.
But there have been times when it's a blank canvas.
Grid system.
Yeah.
We'll do the grids.
So
I think there were a few
mask off sections.
Max off grids. We'll actually, like a tic-tac-toe board.
Yeah.
Like he'll get 3, I'll get 3, he'll get 3. And we'll just...
Oh, yeah, we did those too. The grid, yeah. Yeah, or I might make a drawing of an artist painting on a canvas that's blank, and he'll paint what's being painted, and it's my faceless figure painting a Paul Kostabi painting. Oh, that's a good formula.
That's sort of the one that went into the Guggenheim.
Yes, yeah, the Guggenheim Museum in New York owns one of our collaborations.
Right.
And we did another one.
You just did a museum show together, didn't you? In Italy?
Did
you not?
We did, one recently together in Kingston, New York, at the Kingston Pop Museum. There is a catalog for that, and the Park West Gallery owns a lot of the paintings published in that catalog.
Right.
And then we did another museum show in Caserta, in Italy. Caserta, it's kind of near Naples. Then we did,
that was about 40 or 50 paintings, I think.
Yeah, it was a big show with a catalog, I think. And then numerous art gallery collaboration shows. Oh, one was in the one Gino Nattoni organized at L'Arca Museum in Teramo, Italy. to Central City in Abruzzo. That was a major museum show. So our collaborations have ended up in many museum shows as like two artist shows and also group shows.
Fantastic. I just think it's marvelous that you're able to collaborate and create these amazing paintings together. You know, just another affirmation of your great bond together. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It's really a treat. I know that your collectors and people that love your work are going to really be delighted with the opportunity to hear from you a little bit, more about your background, your pasts, and more about your incredible work. So keep up the great work. Thanks for being a part of the Park West family. Good luck in all of your future events with us. And thank you again for being with us. I look forward to sitting down again with you. Let's do this again in a few years and see where we're at.
Fantastic.
Okay?
Sounds great.
Sound good? All right.